What's going on, everybody? When Akai released the MPK Mini Mk3 recently, my comments were loaded with people asking to do a comparison of the Akai MPK Mini and the Launchkey Mini. Two really great mini MIDI controllers that on the surface might look kind of similar, but actually when we get into it, you're going to see that they actually differ quite a bit. So let's do a full side-by-side comparison comparing these two keyboards so you can figure out which one is the best for you. Today's video is going to be sponsored by Skillshare, but we'll talk about that later. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is TAETRO, your electronic music mentor. Really quick, before we get too deep into the video, if you enjoy live electronic music performances, tutorials, and content to make you a more productive producer, you should click the subscribe button down below. And if at any point during this video I say something you like or you agree with or you just like the vibe, give the video a thumbs up because the engagement really helps the channel. Now, I'll be making music and videos regularly with both of these keyboards and a bunch of other MIDI keyboards that you see behind me and some that you don't even see yet. So if that's something that you're into, I don't think you'll be disappointed by giving a subscribe to the channel and even turning notifications on. But now that that's all out of the way, let's get into comparing these two keyboards. Alright, so on the surface level, these are of course mini MIDI keyboards with keys, pads, and knobs. But they actually have a few things that really separate them and make them quite different from each other. Let's start by talking about the keybed. There isn't a huge difference here. The keys are the same size, so of course for some mini keys are just not enough. For me, they're just fine. But I will say there is a bit of a difference in the construction of the two keybeds. With the new MPK Mini Mk3, Akai has very largely improved their keybed, which some people, had a big problem with in previous iterations. It feels like it has very smooth travel. It doesn't quite feel like just bending plastic. There's no good way to demonstrate that on a video, but what I can say is that the bed on the MPK Mini Mk3 is a bit better than the Launchkey Mini. The Launchkey Mini keybed feels like it has a lot less travel, so a lot less space between pushing down to the very bottom of that keybed. Whereas the MPK Mini keybed, it feels like it has a bit longer travel, and also it just feels a bit smoother. So in terms of keybed, I'm going to go ahead and say the MPK Mini wins out on that one. It's also worth just taking a look at the overall footprint of the controllers. They're roughly the same width, so there's not much difference there. However, the Launchkey Mini is a bit slimmer, but not by much. Akai MPK Mini obviously being a bit beefier there. That also translates though into the build quality, which the Akai MPK Mini has a bit more weight to it. It is slightly bigger, so that makes sense, but it just feels like a more robust build quality versus the Launchkey Mini, which has a bit more of a plastic feel. They are both made of plastic, however, I would have to say the Launchkey Mini definitely feels a bit more plasticky than the slightly more robust MPK Mini. I'll also say the height-wise, this is very important for those of you who want to travel with your controller. This has a very slim profile, especially with those knobs there. But if we take a look at the MPK Mini specifically, it's a bit taller, so the knobs on the MPK here are definitely causing it to be a bit taller, but also the joystick. Now, we'll get into talking about that next, but the joystick definitely protrudes out a bit more than I feel like it should on the MPK, which makes it, slightly harder to travel with because you're always at risk of sort of bending this joystick in ways you don't actually want. But let's talk about the joystick and the pitch bend and modulation strips on the Launchkey. So obviously these are two completely different ways of handling a very common feature of most keyboards. So with touch strip, these are obviously touch sensitive. So here's a pitch bend on the Launchkey. And then of course we have modulation as well. Now the Akai, instead of having, traditional wheels or touch strips like the Launchkey, actually has a joystick, which is kind of cool. But we've run into our first problem here. So the x-axis here, the across axis, is meant to be the pitch bend, which is all fine and good if you can be pretty precise in only moving the x-axis. But what happens is you run the risk of actually messing with the y-axis, the vertical axis, which is the mod. So just like with the Launchkey Mini here, the mod is affecting a sort of filter on this instrument I have loaded here. When I do this on the MPK Mini here, you notice it's kind of doing the same thing. It's affecting the same parameter as I move up and down on this joystick. But when it returns to 0, or its resting position, I've lost sound here because that modulation is actually now at its highest, you could say, value. So I'm not getting any sound here either because they're controlling the same virtual instrument, but it's actually stuck there. I need to actually physically bend it back to get it back, but I don't want to sit there and hold it, right? Return back to the 0 position and we get no sound, which actually forces me to reload this preset that I have here. So for pitch bend, it's kind of cool. But as you can see, I'm just having a ton of trouble even isolating those two axes and not having that issue with the modulation returning to its resting position and actually being at an unhearable position for this particular instrument. And that's true across a bunch of different software instruments. So I very, very much prefer the touch strips on the Launchkey Mini for that one. Let's take a look at the knobs now. So they both feature 8 knobs. We've got 8 pretty small pots, some knobs across the top of the Launchkey Mini, and we've got 4 and 4 here on the Akai MPK Mini. The biggest, most obvious difference here is that on the Akai MPK Mini, these are endless encoders, meaning that when I turn them, they will just spin infinitely. I can keep spinning and it won't stop. This also means that wherever I am on my software instrument or my effect or whatever I'm controlling with this knob in my software, it will always be at the correct value. Versus the Launchkey Mini here, we see these little white lines on the knobs. That's because they have a fixed position. They do not just keep spinning. They have a start and end point. You can only turn them so much. That's as far as this knob here will go that way, and that's as far as it will go that way. Meaning that in my virtual instruments, wherever I may be with this knob, I have to actually adjust it to make sure I'm in the correct position when I pick up on a new control. So without a doubt here, I very much prefer the endless encoders. I mean, endless encoders for me are a dream. I wish they were on every controller. For whatever reason, they were not included here on the Launchkey Mini. To go along with that, if you look when I turn one of these knobs, we're actually seeing the value of the knob on screen here. And that's, of course, a big win for the MPK Mini because there is no screen on the Launchkey Mini. The inclusion of even this tiny little display here can be very helpful when you're navigating around your project and changing different values or even changing different program modes. Both of these controllers actually feature a built-in Arpeggiator. So let's go ahead and engage that on the Launchkey. Arp is now on. And that's perfectly serviceable. Let's go ahead and try that on the MPK. They're playing at different rates, but both controllers have all of your main arpeggiator functions, meaning that you can change that rate. Hold ARP, we can change that to quarter notes. Same here, hold ARP. I can now change the launch key to 16ths. And with each of these, we can add octaves to the arpeggiator. We can change the direction, the swing, your standard arpeggiator functions. However, to test one thing really quick, I'm actually going to just run a metronome in Ableton Live for us to listen to. Now, I want you to notice something when I play the launch key. Those are playing 16th notes along with my project tempo in Ableton Live. However, If I switch over, let's make sure this is on 16th note as well. So hold the ARP and go to 16th mode. Now with this time running, let's play an arpeggiated sequence with the DAW. Those are clearly not 16th notes playing in time with my project. The MPK actually has a tempo setting built into it, which you can change manually, but you can also sync up with your DAW with some additional steps. But that does add some layer of difficulty beyond just being able to plug the controller in and be automatically synced up with your project, which is what the Launchkey Mini has going for it. Now, both of these built-in arpeggiators have a latch function, meaning that I can engage the latch function and I don't have to hold down the keys. This is a pretty standard arpeggiator function available on both keyboards. But the Launchkey Mini actually has a couple more robust arpeggiator features, being the mutate and deviate function, meaning that we could have this arpeggiated sequence going and we can actually mutate it and deviate from it, of course. So if I hold the arpeggiator, I can actually engage the mutate, and as I turn our mutate knob here, it'll start to add notes. And then I can also deviate, which is what's happening now. It's affecting the rhythm of the arpeggiation. And those are two very, very fun functions and just a deeper level of the arpeggiator here on the Launchkey Mini. So definitely a more robust and easier to use with your DAW arpeggiator here on the Launchkey Mini Mk3. And those functions on the Launchkey Mini Mk3's arpeggiator are actually really fun when it comes to playing with hardware. And that's made easy because the Launchkey Mini features a small little 1/8 inch TRS MIDI Out jack, meaning that I could actually USB power this with, say, a power brick or something, and then control some of my hardware with the Launchkey. And it's very fun to do. It's very easy as well. Here's a clip of me actually controlling my electron model cycles with my Launchkey Mini. And if you think controlling hardware is cool and fun and you've got some gear you'd like to control with your mini MIDI keyboard, you're out of luck on the MPK Mini Mk3. There is no MIDI out here on the Akai MPK Mini Mk3. Only USB out, meaning of course you could route MIDI through your computer to your hardware, but to me that kind of defeats the purpose of being able to be standalone with your hardware and not require a computer. Launchkey Mini Mk3, of course, wins in that category. The two major things I want to talk about next are, of course, the pads and then the workflow functionality within a DAW for these two controllers. And no matter which of these controllers you choose, I'm certain that you're going to want to pick one up and start making some music with it as soon as possible. And if that is true for you, you might not only want to be building up your technological skills, but also your musical skills, which is something you can do with today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community where millions come together to take the next step in their creative journey. They have thousands of inspiring classes for creatives, including photography, music, business, content creation, and more. Classes are taught with a combination of video instruction and class projects, and they're taught in manageable bite-sized pieces so that they can fit into almost any schedule. What's cool about today's sponsorship is for the first 1,000 of my subscribers to use the link in the description down below, you'll get yourself 2 months of a free premium membership to Skillshare. Normally, a premium membership is under $10 a month, and with that premium membership, you get access to all of the classes on Skillshare. I've been a especially interested in getting better at mixing and mastering my own music. So one of the classes I've been checking out is the Learn to Mix Music class with Young Guru. And maybe you're still learning some of the fundamentals of music in general. Well, they've actually got a music theory for music producers course that's actually taught within Ableton Live, which is my DAW of choice. So if you're looking for either a creative challenge or some structure, being that we're all stuck at home, you should check out Skillshare and take advantage of the 2-month free premium membership. I've been really fulfilled during this time at home, just trying to level up my knowledge in content creation and music production, music creation in general. And I feel that if you're able to take advantage of those 2 months free Skillshare premium membership, that you would be able to do the same. So link is in the description down below. Let me know if you end up taking advantage of the opportunity with Skillshare in a comment. Now let's get back into talking about these two keyboards. So to tackle the pads here, obviously, the biggest difference between the two keyboards is the Launchkey Mini has 16 pads, whereas the MPK Mini has 8. Now, that doesn't mean you only have access to, 8 pads on the MPK Mini because, of course, there is a bank button, which gives us access to another separate 8 pads. You just don't have access to 16 at your fingertips. Of course, the size difference is probably a big deal for some folks. Now, I don't have much trouble finger drumming on these pads. Actually, let's navigate over to a drum track. Yeah, I don't have much trouble at all. The pads on the MPK Mini, however, are traditional MPC pads. They're the same pads that are actually on the newer MPCs, I believe, the MPC 1, MPC Live. And one thing that I find is that the MPK Mini's pads, if I just tap these kind of lightly, the low velocity is much lower, and I have to hit it much, much harder to get a higher velocity. Whereas on the Launchkey, if I try to do a very similar test, you can hear that range between the two is quite different. And I actually, in this respect, prefer the Launchkey because at no point am I really going to want to be playing that quietly, and at no point do I really want to be slamming the pads that hard to get a full velocity. So it feels a little bit smoother on the Launchkey, in my opinion, and more playable. That said, there is a full level button on the MPK that if we engage it, doesn't matter how hard or soft we hit it, we're getting full velocity. And then in addition to the full level mode, there's also a note repeat function, which we can change the rate for, etc. So it's a trade-off on size there, basically, is what it comes down to. If you're more comfortable with the smaller pads, I very much enjoy the Launchkey Mini's velocity curve there, and I would be willing to trade off the size. For you, it might be different. Also, it goes without saying that these pads here on the Launchkey Mini are RGB, meaning that as I navigate across this project, depending on the color of my track in Ableton Live, the pads change colors. Not only that, but you can see, not to get too deep into it, by holding the shift button, they use color in a way to convey information, and that's true throughout the Launchkey experience here. Meanwhile, we just get some red backlighting here on the MPK Mini. For both of these controllers, we are able to custom map them, of course. I can switch into a custom map mode on these pads, where actually right now they're in a scale mode. They're in a minor scale mode. I can, of course, also switch them into a mode where I can map them to different buttons, which you can also do by engaging the CC functionality on the MPK Mini. But the MPK Mini also has a pad scale mode. So if I hold Program Select and I select this pad right here, I've now got access to a major scale. Do that again, but select this last pad up here. I've got access to a minor scale. So both have cool scale functionality built into their pads, and both can be mapped. Again, the Launchkey taking advantage of the RGB pads here, meaning that these purple pads represent the root note of the scale, while the blue pads in between represent in-key notes. A bit of a difference there. Now you might have seen me holding shift and doing different type of functional things here with the Launchkey Mini, and that is the perfect segue into talking about workflow functionality. Okay, there's no easy way to talk about this without, giving away all my cards here. I am an Ableton Live user. That is my main DAW of choice. The Launchkey Mini has workflow functionality built into it that is essentially made specifically for Ableton Live. And let me show you what I mean. Holding the shift button here gives me access to the session view on my pads. You notice these two pads are red here, which means I can record clips into Ableton Live. Our Arpeggiator is still on there. But you could see that it was literally that easy to record a new loop. And that's because of the function that's possible in Ableton Live, but also the fact that it's possible here to control it on the Launchkey Mini. You might have also noticed that I press the play button. I've got transport controls here. In addition to a record button, now I can layer on top. Just demonstrating that simple capability shows you how much more functional from a workflow perspective the Launchkey Mini is in relation to the Akai MPK Mini. There are no transport controls on here, so DAW agnostic, even if you wanted a play, stop, or record button, regardless of what DAW you're using, it doesn't exist here on the MPK Mini, unfortunately. Which means that you will need to supplement the MPK Mini with either a workflow controller for your DAW specifically, or you just have to get used to, clicking around with your mouse and then also using the MPK Mini, which is fine for some. For me, when I know that the Launchkey Mini exists and being an Ableton user, I just can't let that functionality go. And that's not even the end of it, and I don't want to bore you all too much if you're not an Ableton user. But navigating around my project is made super easy with the Launchkey. If I hold shift here, I can actually use these two buttons to navigate around. So now I'm actually in the drum mode. Whereas if I navigate back, I'm back to my synth. Navigate back to my drums, and I can do that all around my project. Very, very useful from a workflow perspective. It doesn't really end there either. If I go back to session mode here, I can change the function of this bottom row of pads to either stop my clips, solo them if I want to, as well as just straight up mute the track. And that's just the additional functionality on the pads. If I hold shift here, these three pads are orange because I can change the mode of the pads. The right teal pads here actually affect the different functionality of the knobs. So I get access to controlling a device, my volume, my pan, my sends, and then I also get a custom page. So again, I'm not trying to bore the non-Ableton users too much, but the functionality in the Launchkey Mini Mk3 is miles ahead of the MPK Mini Mk3, especially for Ableton users. And of course, that's my limited perspective with my one DAW, and I know many of you use many other DAWs, and that might not mean much to you. Either of these controllers are compatible with any DAW, but some of these functions on the Launchkey Mini are built specifically for Ableton Live, meaning that the controller has lots of text on it that won't make sense to you if you don't use Ableton Live. However, what it comes down to is what they call scripts, right? So they essentially release templates for these controllers to function better with some DAWs or other DAWs. And with the Launchkey, in addition to the Ableton script, which makes all these great functions work, on their website they also have listed that there are Logic and Reason scripts available. So this should work really well with both of those DAWs, but will also work at a very base level with most other DAWs anyway. Now with the Akai MPK Mini here, we can actually look at the scripts right on the controller because we can use our Program Select button and it will tell us on screen. So on the very first pad, we've got the MPC workflow, that goes for MPC Studio or MPC Beats. On the second pad, we've got an Ableton Live script, a Logic Pro X script, FL Studio, 20, GarageBand, chroma pads, which I'm not even sure what that is, and then we have our major and minor scale. So you can see right on there that there are scripts built into this controller, essentially for Ableton Live, meaning I can control macro knobs with these knobs, but beyond that, workflow-wise, there's not much there on the MPK, which is kind of a make or break for me. Doesn't mean I won't use this controller and have some fun, but, you know, it depends if all the other things we talked about earlier matter more to you than some of that workflow functionality. Another big difference between these two keyboards is the software that's included with them out of the box. I'm going to put those up on screen, but the two major differences are the program that they give you to actually make music out of the box. Launchkey comes with Ableton Live 10 Lite, which is a limited version of Ableton Live, plus a bunch of other sounds plugins. The MPK comes with Akai's MPC Beats, which is a fairly new free DAW that they've put together. It's actually a limited version of their more robust MPC software. I don't have to tell you, but I will anyway. I much prefer Ableton Live. I don't love the workflow of MPC Beats in particular, but either of these controllers, out of the box, you get a piece of software that you can start making music right away. In addition to, they both provide you with some sounds, some plugins. So with all of that information, I hope you are able to come to your own conclusions about what would work best for you in your home studio and your workflow. The final verdict for me is if I had to, be on a desert island and I could only choose one, I would have to choose the Launchkey Mini just based on the workflow functionality with Ableton Live. If I absolutely couldn't use the Launchkey Mini, I had to use the MPK, I of course could. I would just use my mouse or whatever. If I had the choice of pairing the MPK with something like a Launchpad or a Launchpad Mini together, that would be a very powerful combination. But that's just for me, and you have to make the decision for what works best for you. So I hope that was helpful. These are both very powerful, very capable mini MIDI controllers, and I wouldn't blame you for choosing either one, or even both. But that's going to be it for today's comparison. Make sure you let me know in a comment down below if you end up picking one of these up and what, tipped the scales for you. What helped you make your decision when comparing these two? I know there's a lot of interest in doing a Mini Lab and MPK Mini Mk3 comparison, so let me know if you're interested in that and I'll get that one queued up soon. And make sure you're subscribed for more live electronic music performances, tutorials, and content to make you a more productive producer. I've got a Spotify link down in the description, and it would mean a lot to me if you added one of my tracks to your playlist. I'm trying to release music every month and be more consistent with that. Don't forget to grab your 2 months free of Skillshare. Take as many courses as you can that 2 months. I think you can make some great headway, especially if you are picking up your first controller or a controller to make music with. And thank you so much for watching. This has been TAETRO, your electronic music mentor. Have a good one.